Hi guys, Matt here from Matt's Movie Reviews. As you all know, I'm a big horror fan, and I always wanted to do these tier lists. I'm a big fan of them, so I'm going to do a tier list for 1970s horror movies. I got around 20-ish titles here ready to go. Some really big, iconic 1970s horror movies, some little ones, and I'm going to put them in a different ranking here. Before I begin, I just want to ask all of you, encourage you all to please subscribe to my channel. And please also check out the Matt's Movie Reviews website. That's at mattsmoviereviews.net. If you like my shirt, good old Sorcerer from William Friedkin, one of the most underrated and best movies of the 1970s. Please do also check out my TeePublic merch store, the link's below. And if you want to support my work, please check out my Patreon, where you can make movie requests and top 10s and tier list requests and whatever requests you want to do and just help out a content creator much as myself. Okay, let's get to it. Our 1970s tier list. So I got tiers here, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to break it down this way. 5 is like a masterpiece. I mean, perfection or close to perfection as you can get. 4, great film. Just missing a couple qualities to get that 5, but a great film. Number 3, a solid film. Number 2 is kind of like a meh. It's okay. 1, it's the shits. Now this is based on my opinion of these films. Some of these films might be in spots that you will not agree with. If you don't agree, if you do, let me know in the comments below. Give me your reasons as to why I got some wrong or got some right. So we're going to start off with Alien, 1979 sci-fi horror movie by Ridley Scott. It is a great film. The craft on display is fantastic. Of course, it being a Ridley Scott movie, it would be. The H.R. Greer creature designs for the, I think it's a xenomorph, it's the name of the alien creature, is fantastic. For a lot of people though, Alien is like in that masterpiece stratosphere, but I myself am going to put it in 4 out of 5 here. I believe that Alien is a great film. It really is. And it's a movie that I've watched many times, both the director's cuts and the original theatrical cuts as well. As I said before, it's a great kind of creature feature sci-fi filmmaking. For me though, it doesn't really hit that upper echelon of 5 out of 5. I believe that maybe because there's been so many Alien films come out since then, that when I first watched Alien, which would have been, I don't know, maybe in the mid-90s, late 90s maybe. Maybe by then I was a little desensitized by how good Alien was. There's so many pop culture references by then that I didn't get that shock value that a lot of people back in, say, the late 70s and throughout the 80s would have gotten. That being said though, it is a great film. Sigourney Weaver is fantastic in it. Ridley Scott really set himself a great career following Alien. Next we have the Amityville Horror. This was released in 1979. It's a story about the Lutz family, directed by Stuart Rosenberg. Amityville Horror though, for me, hasn't really stood the test of time. Now, when I was around, I don't know, a teenager, like maybe 16, 17, I remember watching the Amityville Horror. It was on late night TV, and when I watched it at that time in my life, I thought it was the scariest thing I've ever seen. When I rewatched it maybe like 10 or so years later, and by that time I had a whole bunch of horror consumed by then. Amityville Horror didn't have the same kind of impact that it did have when I was younger. You know, even though I do get some joy out of certain scenes in the movie, I think the scene where I don't know if she was a clairvoyant or something, she finds that gateway to hell that's like underneath the basement, and Josh Brolin's character starts knocking down the bricks and they find a red room. I still find that scene to be very effective. But overall, I don't, not the biggest fan of it, and because I'm going to put that in the 2 tier. You know, it could go in the 3 tier here, but I just don't think there's enough going on with it. But Amityville Horror, for its time, I think was a good film. But as the decades have progressed, I don't think it's really stood the test of time that well. So I'm going to go Amityville Horror from 1979 in the 2 tier here. Okay, now we got The Brood, David Cronenberg. See, David Cronenberg for me is a bit hit and miss. Like, I'm a big fan of him. I am a big fan of him, but sometimes he has movies like especially some early stuff and more experimental stuff that just really perplexing for me to watch. But of his earlier work, the stuff that he did in Canada, the kind of like more independent stuff, I thought that The Brood was the most effective of those. I remember doing a top 10 list of my favorite David Cronenberg films. I don't know, it must have been like 10 years ago or so. And I watched that movie, and man, I was just really shocked in that film about some of the scenes in there. The scene that's really really still gives me the creeps, and I think really just is pure nightmare fuel, is when the little creatures, the little children creatures kill the kindergarten teacher in the classroom with the hammers. That was just something else altogether. Again, it's really bizarre. It's got that whole body horror thing to it that Cronenberg is known for. But I think it was like a really well made film for its budget, for its time. David Cronenberg really getting his ideas and his themes underneath him. I'm not going to put it in the 4, but I'm going to put here as a solid 3. Now, again, it could be higher. I just think that maybe some of the more bizarre aspects of the movie, which I think some people do like, just was a bit of a turner for me. So I will put it in the 3 here. It's a high 3 though. A classic here coming up next, Carrie. A lot of people love Carrie. Popular film of its time. I think it came out in 1976. Sissy Spacek in it. John Travolta, very young John Travolta. You know, I can understand its place in the history of horror, the horror iconography of Sissy Spacek being drenched in the blood at the school prom, and just that wide-eyed look and just unleashing hell with her telekinetic abilities. Brian De Palma's direction in it as well. But that being said, whenever I watch the film, it doesn't have the same impact on me that I thought it would. While Spacek's really good in the film, some of the other actors, I don't feel the same way. And I think Brian De Palma, he's one of those directors where he can like deliver really great films. Like I love the stuff he did with Pacino in Carlito's Way and Scarface, and I love The Untouchables, movies like that. But I think when it came to his more kind of horror stuff, and I think Dress to Kill you can add that in there. Even though I do like Dress to Kill better than Carrie, Carrie doesn't really do the same thing to me in regards to its horror elements, in regards to its commentary about fanaticism and other themes of the like as well. So I'm going to put it right here in the 3. In many ways, I think what really holds up after all these decades, more than anything else, is Sissy Spacek's performance in the film. She's really kind of like the character's transformation to like this quiet, kind of like mousy teenager who's going through this really kind of rough time in her life, being bullied both at school and practically abused in a very kind of like strict religious household. I think it shows a really good kind of dramatic depth in a horror movie. It's just that there's other things in the movie, including some of De Palma's kind of direction and his kind of like his visual tricks that he likes to implement in his movies, which I think at that time you're still trying to feel out and get a handle for who he was as a filmmaker. It just didn't work for me. I mean, a solid 3. I'll put The Brood above it though. But yeah, I do think that it did not and still does not have the same effect on me as it does some other people. Next we have Dawn of the Dead. I'm going to pop this right up here in tier number 4. Now, I'm not the biggest zombie movie fan. I think especially over the last 10, 15 years, the genre has just really just gone nutso. I think when 28 Days Later and the Dawn of the Dead remake, the Zack Snyder one, which I'm a fan of as well, when those two came out, just really caused a really just huge upswing of zombie movies from then on. And then you have, the Walking Dead TV series, and on it goes. I think it's just like too much, almost like the demonic possession films. There's just a little too much of them at the moment. I think they're really easy pickings for a lot of horror filmmakers. That being said, the films of George A. Romero, the zombie movies especially. I am a fan of just really great zombie horror filmmaking here. I really like the social commentary of the movie in the fact that these survivors are stuck in a shopping mall, and in the mall themselves, it's like all these zombies just going around, almost kind of like autopilot. Their human lives were so materialistic that that's like a place that they all kind of latch onto. I love Tom Savini's effects work in it, the way that he created the zombies and all of the kind of like the scenes of dismemberment and such. I mean, still to this day, I think, I mean, you could see some of the you can see some of the work on display. It doesn't really what's the word I'm looking for? The illusion of the filmmaking is not as prominent as it would have been back in the late 70s, but I kind of appreciate that as well. I love practical effects, and I think Tom Savini's work, especially in Dawn of the Dead in regards to the practical effects, is just fantastic. As I said before, I love the social commentary. I love George Romero's handle on the genre. He really is the godfather of zombie films, and it's no wonder why the genre still lives today, because I think you could, even though I do think a lot of there's too many of the films being made, the best ones really have a really good social and even political component to them, which, while I'm not a fan of that showing up in a lot of films, some filmmakers can do are really good at that, and I think George A. Romero is one of the best at bringing that political kind of social commentary in his movies. Another movie that really stands the test of time, that really has kind of like a simple premise to it, but a really effective one, is Duel. You know, I don't know if it's I imagine, I think it would be the feature film of Steven Spielberg. I know it was a TV movie released in 1971, but it was so good as a TV movie that they put it in cinemas. And it was pretty much the film that, and I think after that was the Sugar Hill Gang, I think it was called, with what was the name? Goldie Hawn was in that. Those were the films, but especially Duel, that helped Spielberg land Jaws, and you can see why. You know, the Universal Pictures or Universal Studios at that time would have chosen Spielberg for Jaws after watching Duel, because, man, this is like white knuckle tight kind of like thriller horror filmmaking. I think it's quite exceptional and quite good, especially for such a young filmmaker. What else I love about the movie is that it's like this kind of like pursuer, predator aspect to it, but you never know the reasons behind why it is happening. You don't know who is behind the wheel of the truck, and I think that caused the truck itself to be a character in the movie, almost like a living, breathing kind of creature. This creature of violence and mayhem, kind of like the shark itself in Jaws. What that will become, and it's just like a lot of the scenes in that movie. I know in the last like decades you had some really great movies that dealt with cars and cars chases, you know, the Mad Max films, for example. These days, the example of that is like the Fast and the Furious movies. But what Duel has, especially over those Fast and Furious movies, is that there's that practical element to the car chases, and the way that Spielberg shoots and frames them, and the way they're edited, and the reactions from the lead actor as to, you know, he doesn't know why he's being pursued, he doesn't know why he's being targeted, but like come hell or high water, he will like stand up for himself and try to go back at the man in the big truck. I think it's just really exceptional thriller horror filmmaking there. It's really great work. So I placed it here in the 4 category, just on the Dawn of the Dead. Next up, we have what I believe is, you know, not only the greatest horror film of all time, but is my favorite movie of all time, and that is The Exorcist. Well, you know what really bumps me out about this movie lately is that it just seems like as the years have gone past, especially after the late 90s director's cut, the version you haven't seen, I think the lore for the film is so big in regards to the grotesque elements of the film, the spinning head, the vomiting of the pea soup and all these other things, and that the actual depth and context of the movie itself, what William Peter Blatty wrote in the novel and in the screenplay that he adapted for the film, kind of goes over people's heads. This is a movie, I think, that portrays the battle between good and evil in a traditional Catholic Christian context in such a powerful, depth-filled, fascinating way. And I think that even though lately religious horror has become incredibly popular, demonic possession films have become exceedingly popular since Paranormal Activity in 2009, especially kind of the low budget kind of stuff. That a lot of people tend to look over or not tap into enough what the film is about in regards to its themes. I mean, I believe that David Gordon Green, bloody hell, didn't understand anything about The Exorcist. If The Exorcist believer is any indication of that, I mean, that was an incredibly terrible movie. And I think a big reason why it was a terrible film is because he did not tap into the spiritual religious context, which brought the stakes high in not only regards to the very transparent theme of good versus evil, but also in the inner turmoil of a lot of characters. Most primarily, the character of Father Karras is played by Jason Miller. You know, he is the main character in the film. It isn't about the possessed girl. The possessed girl, played by Linda Blair so wonderfully, in the voicing by, I think it was Mercedes McCambridge, who did the voicing for the role of the demon. They're all wonderful in the film, but the movie is about Damien Karras, the priest. That's what the movie is really about, and I think Jason Miller is fantastic in the movie. I think that William Friedkin's direction, the late, great William Friedkin, as you know, I'm a fan, I'm wearing his shirt. Don't forget, you can get this shirt and more at TeePublic. Just look at the link down below. It's like nothing we've seen since. A lot of demonic possession movies have come out, and there's been some exceptional ones. Lately, there was a really good film called Where Evil Lurks. I thought that was a really great film as well. But what William Friedkin did with the material, with his kind of almost documentary style approach to filmmaking, the way that the film kind of builds up and has a really good dramatic kind of grounding to it. So when the ship does hit the fan and the demonic possession parts and all the gory parts kind of kick in, and also the great performances by Ellen Burstyn and Max von Sydow, Lee J. Cobb, and of course Jason Miller. It just leads to what I believe to be an exceptional film. Also, let's not forget as well the great makeup and effects by Dick Smith. Talking before about Tom Savini and Dawn of the Dead, Dick Smith and his work in The Exorcist and other movies as well is just phenomenal. I think a lot of people really need to look into his work. As I said before, I love practical effects. I love kind of like practical makeup stuff. Way better than any of the CGI stuff. And The Exorcist takes all of those elements. It's a dramatic film. It's a horror film. It's a film about. It's a film with high stakes. It's a film about good and evil, God and the devil, and humanity's kind of part in between that. And I think it's just a fantastic film. What I don't think is a fantastic film, though, is it's, I guess you could call it a sequel. I like to think of it as kind of like a bad nightmare that has been thrust upon the filmmaking public since its release in 1977, and that is Exorcist II: The Heretic, which goes right down here in the one spot. Terrible, terrible movie. As I said prior to The Exorcist, that movie was about the priest, about Father Karras. What they tried to do with Exorcist II, when I say they, I mean director John Borman and whoever wrote this atrocity, they tried to make it more about Linda Blair's character, Regan. She's like a young like a late teenager, young adult now in the film. Ellen Burstyn didn't return in the film, neither did any of the... I think Max von Sydow is in the film. It's actually got a great cast. Richard Burton's in it, but he's terrible in it. James Earl Jones, who was the actress, Louise Fletcher is in as well, who had just a couple of years prior to that won the Oscar for One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, excuse me. So it had a great cast. John Borman is a terrific director. He did Excalibur, he did Deliverance 2, of my favorite films. Ennio Morricone has this kind of wild soundtrack in it, but it all was just a big mess because they were trying to do stuff with the elements of the film, which had all these things to do with, I don't know, African ritual and these scenes where like people were riding on. I kid you not, the scenes where people were riding around on bees and they transformed into tigers and all this other stuff. And look, if you're not any religious at all, I guess you could say that even the things in The Exorcist in regards to its theological aspects is just as weird and bizarre. But in the context of that film, in the world building that William Peter Blatty put into the first movie, Exorcist 2 just took a really great premise, took a great actors, and just flushed it down the toilet. Next up, we got, I think, one of the best slasher films of all time, Halloween, which I'm going to put here. I'm just going to put it above Duel. Yeah, there we go. John Carpenter's kind of like first kind of breakthrough movie. He co-wrote it, he directed it, and in that movie, not only did he bring us Jamie Lee Curtis, who is like to this day I think one of the best kind of scream queens that we've ever had, and I think how she reprised the role later in David Gordon Green's trilogy, which I actually I think is not too bad. The first of the Gordon Green Halloween movies was pretty cool. The second and third, not as good as the other ones, but I had some interesting ideas in it. But not only did he bring us Jamie Lee Curtis, but he also brought us Mike Myers. Or should I say Michael Myers. In Michael Myers, he gave us one of horror movies' greatest boogeymen, who still today is showing up in movies. And I think I just read that Miramax bought the rights to the TV show as well. The score of the film is fantastic. I think John Carpenter's work as a composer is just as influential on the horror genre as his work as a filmmaker is. He's fantastic movie. Performances are great. The setting, Halloween night in this fictional town. I'm pretty sure it's a fictional town of Haddonfield, and the kind of like the dramatic backstory in regards to who Michael Myers is and who Jamie Lee Curtis's character is as well. It's just all really brilliantly done. And I think Halloween is one of those films where not only does it still work now, it's actually one of those films where the more I watch it, the more impressed I am with it, because it was quite a low budget film when that movie came out, and it became, of course, a huge pop culture sensation. Numerous sequels afterwards, remakes and reboots or what have you. But the first one, released in 1978, I believe it's going to have its anniversary in October 25th. I believe it'll have like what would that be? It's 35th. I'm not sure anniversary, but I think it's a incredible movie. From one horror master to another, let's talk about Wes Craven. He had a film, I believe, came out in 1977 called The Hills Have Eyes. So I'm going to put that here in the 2 spot. A lot of the early films of Wes Craven were quite nasty stuff. The Last House on the Left, which I haven't seen, but from more indications, still has that high shock value to it. I think The Hills Have Eyes definitely has a shock value to it as well. The story about this family on traveling in their caravan, and they're trying to take a shortcut across a desert, which used to be a former nuclear nuclear testing ground, I guess. And then in the hills of this desert are these inbred family of mutants, of which you look at the cover, Michael Berryman, the great Michael Berryman. Is one of the members. There are moments in the movie which are still quite shocking. In the remake of the film, which came out during the whole kind of like mid-2000s torture porn craze, which I felt was just too much for me to watch at times. Like I can deal with violence in movies and violence in horror movies, but I think that era of filmmaking especially just took it really to a kind of like a level that sometimes made me feel really kind of wheezy and uncomfortable. But The Hills Have Eyes does have some pretty cool elements to it. And it does really, it's interesting to watch a filmmaker like Wes Craven, who will later on go on to do things like Scream and a Nightmare on Elm Street series. Watch him kind of like develop his style with some really kind of like low budget, but really kind of, I don't know if I call it trashy, but maybe kind of like it's exploitative kind of material. So yeah, it's not a movie that really kind of like made an impression on me in a positive way, save for the fact that it was like an interesting to watch Wes Craven deal with that type of material. And Michael Berryman, I think, is like one of the most unique. I love what I really love about horror movies is like you can get some really great actors who just have this really unique look, going all the way back to Peter Lorre and the stuff that Lon Chaney could do, and going on to, I mean, who's around now that could do stuff like that. I don't know off the top of my head, but there's just David Dasmalchian, for example, has a really great unique look to him as well. The one thing I love about The Hills Have Eyes, if I don't know if any of you have seen the John Hughes film Weird Science, but Michael Berryman has a cameo in it as kind of like a mutant biker. So it's like kind of doing a parody of his work in The Hills Have Eyes. So I think that was pretty cool. But The Hills Have Eyes as a movie just doesn't really, just didn't really have an impact on me. Next on the list is one of my favorite sci-fi horror movies. I was talking before about how much I love Alien as a sci-fi horror. And The Thing, I think, is my favorite sci-fi horror, but also up there is The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. 1978 was released, directed by Philip Kaufman, really underrated filmmaker. He did The Right Stuff in 1983 as well. The movie stars Donald Sutherland, Jeff Goldblum. I think it might have been Karen Black who was in that movie as well. Leonard Nimoy, surprisingly, playing a psychiatrist in the film. Robert Duvall has a very small cameo in it as well. But yeah, it's in like The Thing as well. It is a remake, but I know I haven't seen the original. But I think this version of the film. There was another remake in 1996. I think Abe Ferrara did that. This 1978 version, I think, is just absolutely exceptional. The final scene of Invasion of the Body Snatchers, in my opinion, has one of the great final frames in the film in regards to Donald Sutherland and the kind of pose and that his character does at the end. I don't want to give away spoilers, even though it is an older film. It's a film I really encourage people to see because I don't think enough people of this generation have watched it. Invasion of Body Snatchers, great material, really adapted well for that decade, late 70s. You had kind of like the real kind of a Nixon era kind of paranoia kind of stuff. A lot of great paranoid conspiracy thrillers came out at that time. So having kind of like aliens taking over humanity by taking over their body or taking over their bodies is, I think, a really prime great material to be adapted for that decade. And as I said, like the direction's great, the performances. Donald Sutherland is fantastic in the film. One of the great underrated actors, I think. And I'm going to put Invasion of the Body Snatchers, I think, around here. Like I said, I'm a big fan of the film. Would I put it above Alien though? See, already I can hear a lot of you saying, how can you put it above Alien? But Invasion of the Body Snatchers really is one of my favorite films. Yep, I think I'm going to leave it there for now. Invasion of the Body Snatchers is a great film there. Big fan of that movie. Let's move on to one of the biggest films of all time and one of my favorite horror movies in movies of all time, which goes right up here in the 5-tier, Jaws. I mean, what is there left to say about Jaws? Steven Spielberg, to this day, I think, still his best film. And I know he's done some really kind of like pedigree movies since then, like Schindler's List and Saving Private Ryan and others as well. But Jaws, to me, I think, shows Spielberg at his most kind of like innovative, especially as people know in the movie, there was a lot of difficulties on that shoot, to the point where whenever people kind of mention Jaws to Spielberg, he often kind of like winces and says, I'm glad that people like that film, but when I think about the movie, I just think about how much of a pain in the ass it was to make it. And like, look, fair enough to him for that, but for the rest of us, we we really get to enjoy this fantastic piece of horror, adventure, entertainment. It's a monster movie in a lot of ways. It's a movie that I think does exceptional work in really building up the tension throughout the movie. It's a film that's got exceptional performances in the movie, from Roy Scheider to Richard Dreyfuss, Robert Shaw as well. I think the three of them when they're on the boat together. It's an interesting film in that the first half of the movie kind of feels like almost like a serial killer movie. It has a really kind of thriller aspect to it. And in the second half of the movie, it's kind of like an adventure movie in that these three guys go on a boat. They know they're dealing with a great white shark. They're going to go out into the middle of the ocean and try to kill the shark and save the town of Amity, of which the great white shark has been chomping on its residents. Of course, the great score by John Williams in the movie. I think it's one of those films that its impact on pop culture is so huge that people tend to forget just how much of a great film it is. And what I mean by that is that the filmmaking on display and the performances and the writing, I think it's just really exceptional. I think holds the best monologue in a movie by Robert Shaw, which apparently was also had a lot of hands on that. I think John Milius, the great John Milius, who directed Red Dawn and Conan the Barbarian and other great movies as well. He wrote some of that as well. So it's just a really fantastic, masterful film, and that's why it's up there in the 5 tier here of my favourite 1970s horror films. Now, its follow-up, Jaws 2. So I'm going to pop that here in the 2 tier. I'm going to put it above The Hills Have Eyes. But will I put it above Amityville Horror? I'm going to leave it there for now. Look, the thing about Jaws 2, and I think it's the same as The Exorcist 2, but especially Jaws 2, is that it has the impossible task of following up on a masterful piece of work. You know, a film that is as close to perfection as you're ever going to get. No Spielberg on board, of course, because of the experience that he had in filming the first one. I'm sure he didn't want to go back in the water. There are some really impressive moments in the film. I think the shark attack sequences are actually quite good in the movie, and also at that time when Jaws 2 came out, Halloween had just come out, so the whole kind of teen slasher thing was getting very popular. So there's also almost like a teen slasher kind of aspect to the movie as well. And Roy Scheider is in it again. But what made that first Jaws film so great was the build-up to when we finally see the great white shark, and Roy Scheider has the infamous line of, like, we're going to need a bigger boat. Jaws 2 can't repeat that same trick. So, of course, I had to try different things with the shark and make the horror scenes much more impactful and violent. And I got to say, there are scenes in the movie which are quite shocking even today, but it's just does not have the same impact as the first Jaws movie. Now, that's not to say that it is a bad film. Actually, I'm just thinking about it now. I do have a soft spot for Jaws 2 because I actually watched Jaws 2 first before Jaws. I remember being a kid back in the days of VHS, shout out to all your 80s kids out there. And it was on VHS. I remember watching it now and again, and when I was younger, just being fascinated by it. And there's still just thinking now some really great moments in that film. I'm thinking I'm going to pop it up here in the 3 category. Borderline with a 2, but I think it's got enough to it there with a 3. Again, it's not, you can't match up to what Spielberg did with Jaws because of all the things that I said. But reflecting on it now and talking about it, I'm convinced myself that, considering the film that it was following, considering that it couldn't have that element of building that tension with the film, I think it did a pretty good job with the material that it had and the big shadow that loomed over it. So I'm going to put it here in the 3 tier. I might change my mind and put it back down. If I do put it back down, I'll put it ahead of Amityville. I'm going to leave it here in the 3 tier. Now, of course, you could tell by my accent, that I'm an Aussie here in Sydney, Australia, and we're going to have a couple of Australian horror films here. And the first one I'm going to have is a film called Long Weekend. Really fascinating movie. I think it came out in 1978. I'm just double checking my notes here. Yep, 1978. It's a movie about this couple. They go on a long weekend holiday, I guess Americans would say vacation, to like a rural kind of place that's near a beach, and they are continuously attacked by the environment about them, whether it's the animals or the trees or what have you. There's a certain commentary to the film in regards to the impact that humanity has on environment, and so I love the poster here. But before I go on, let me just pop this here in the fourth here. It's one of my favorite Australian horror movies. The poster here says, "Their crime was against nature. Nature found them guilty." And it sounds a little weird how I'm describing it, but there is that specific subgenre of horror films where it's kind of like the environmental horror film, where whether it's I don't know, plant life or different species or what have you. That is like bacteria even. That is the antagonist in the movie, and Long Weekend has that element to it. It's basically you just have the two actors in the film, Bryony Behetz and John Hargraves. It's directed by Colin Eggleston. It's been a little while since I've seen the movie, but I remember watching it. I was being incredibly impressed by it. And had watched it a couple of times since then, but it has been a little while. There was a remake that came out in 2008 with Jim Caviezel and Claudia Gabon, which I haven't seen, but by all indications, not the best movie. But yeah, when it comes to Aussie horror, Long Weekend, I think he's up there with as one of the best, because it is a film that does really good work with a deceptively simple premise, and it's low budget, and I think it brings about real genuine terror in the way that the filmmaking comes all together in the film. So it's a really recommended movie there. Next up, we've got another George A. Romero classic. This time it's in regards to the vampire genre, and the film is Martin. Now this is a really interesting movie. This came out, I'm pretty sure, in 1978 as well. And pretty much the premise of the film is you have a teenager who really believes that he's an actual vampire. Now this is we're dealing with like a really almost kind of tragic situation, in that this teenager is going around and killing people and sucking their blood and such. But there's a bit of kind of genuine George A. Romero aspect to it. There is a social commentary to the film. And what I think that he does with the movie in regards to the vampire movie, in that it's a film that kind of satires vampire convention and vampire tropes, but at the same time he creates a really kind of thrilling vampire movie in its own right, which I hope makes some sense. There's a really great actor in the movie. I forgot his name, but he plays the an uncle or a grandfather to Martin, who believes that Martin is also a vampire. And the end scene of the movie is quite shocking for anyone who watches it. And there's also a thing in the movie that I remember was actually quite touching. There's a relationship between Martin and I think an older lady in the film, who kind of like speaks to Martin's humanity. And it's kind of like this weird juxtaposition where Martin pretends he's a creature, an undead creature, but this woman brings out the humanity in him. And I think it's kind of sweet the way to do so. But let's not be fooled. This is a George A. Romero movie. It's a film that has quite a bit of gore in it. It can be quite shocking at times as well. But in the very long pedigree of vampire movies, Martin is actually one of my favorites, and also one of my favorite movies of the 1970s. So I'm going to pop it ahead of Long Weekend. I'm going to pop it ahead of Duel, and I know some people are going to hate this, but I'm going to pop it ahead of Halloween as well, because I'm actually a big fan of Martin, right behind that other George A. Romero classic, Dawn of the Dead. And hey, we got another vampire movie here, The Night Stalker. Now, this movie was actually a TV film. I think there was like a bunch of different, from what I can remember, there are a bunch of different TV movies in regards to novels in regards to this that had the main protagonist being a journalist named Kolchak. And it was kind of like, in a kind of weird way, kind of like the X-Files before the X-Files, but instead of it dealing with the federal, instead of the FBI, it was dealing with the media. And all these weird kind of cases would slip by all these other journalists. I think it was set in Las Vegas. But this one kind of like gumshoe, old school kind of reporter named Kolchak, he's the one that would like really delve into these cases and take them to and investigate them to their final conclusion, which a lot of the time had to deal with supernatural things. And The Night Stalker is a vampire tale. And I think, just like Martin, it's a unique vampire tale in that, in some ways, kind of messes around with vampire convention, but it's quite effective in a way that it broaches the vampire genre as well. The creature in the film, although, from what I remember, I don't think he like turns into a bat or anything like that, but it is quite an imposing, threatening, and dangerous creature at the film. And Kolchak is kind of like this guy with where it's one of those kind of like worn out suit and then a top hat and everything. Kind of looks like more something suited to a 1930s noir than you would in a 1970s movie. But I think the way that they approach the genre, in that it's like very much an investigative thriller, it's a mystery, it is a horror movie as well. It all comes together really well. And even though it's a TV movie, I got to say that the quality of the acting and even the way that the film is really kind of really engrossing, how it sucks you into the story. And Kolchak is such a endearing kind of character. Like, he's not a Boy Scout by any means, but he's a character who plays a reporter who's in a pursuit of the truth. And I think that's like a really kind of endearing, kind of old school, kind of pure view of journalism that I think a lot of people wish would still be the norm, but don't want to go into any more of that. But anyway, The Night Stalker, a really great 1970s, I think it came out 73, a horror vampire movie, investigative thriller, journalism movie, I think you could call it as well. Now, where I'll put it in this list, I'll leave it where it is for now. I am a fan of that movie, and I do recommend people, if they haven't seen The Night Stalker or any of the Kolchak movies or TV series, do check it out. Next up is a huge hit in 1976, directed by Richard Donner, starring Gregory Peck, and it is The Omen. So I'm going to put The Omen here in the 3 category, after The Brood, in front of Carrie. The Omen's one of those films that kind of like Amityville Horror, I think for its time was a really effective film. And there are moments in the movie which are still quite shocking. I mean, the first 10-15 minutes or so has a scene where a nanny for the child in the film named Damien, who it says in the movie, and follow-up movies as well, and I know there was a remake as well that came out, is The Antichrist. She, at the child's birthday party, very affluent birthday party, the Damien character is adopted by Gregory Peck and his wife. The Gregory Peck character, I think, is an American ambassador to Britain, so the movie is based in the UK, but the actors, of course, are American. They are have a really big birthday party for the kid. There's a clown and all sorts of stuff, and then all of a sudden, the nanny jumps off the bloody roof and hangs herself in front of all the children. That's right, beforehand she yells like, "Damien, this is for you." I mean, that's still a scene that really just is incredibly shocking to this day. However, the movie as a whole, even though it's a solid piece of entertainment, and even though there are what Richard Donner does in some moments in the movie, he does some really interesting things in the film in regards to its horror elements. I don't think he's as strong as the decades have progressed. But it is a solid piece of filmmaking, a legendary horror movie. And as I said before, Richard Donner has some really kind of great scenes in the movie, but as a film overall, it doesn't have the same impact, I think, that it had on me as it would have with people growing up with that film in the late 70s and early 80s. Next up, we have another Australian horror movie. So this is a film that I'm pretty sure came out in, here we are, 1978. And this, I think, might be a bit controversial for some people because I talked about Carrie before, about the movie about that deals with telekinesis. This is another movie that deals with that as well. It's called Patrick, directed by Richard Franklin. It tells a story about this character named Patrick. He's a comatose killer, but he has these telekinetic powers. So as he's in a coma, he uses these telekinesis to do all sorts of havoc, including murder. And there's a kind of stalker element to the film in that he's really obsessed with his nurse in the movie. There's really great use of horror iconography in the film in the way that Patrick, kind of like similar to how Sissy Spacek does it in her movie, he kind of like he's comatose, but his eyes are always open. And it's really kind of startling when you first see it. And the actor who does it, I think the actor's name is Robert Helpman. I think Robert Thompson plays the part of Patrick. Okay. He does a really great job in that movie. He's got a really bad kind of like perm in the film, but he does a really great job in holding those eyes open, really kind of intense glare to it. And what Richard Franklin does with the film, like I said, it's this Aussie movie. Aussie movies back in the 70s, even though late 70s and early 80s, even though they were going through what is now known as the new wave of Australian filmmaking, back then the budgets weren't as big as like in comparison to what the US had for a lot of their movies. But I think the filmmaking on display here is fantastic. I love the performances in the film, and in my opinion, I'm going to be in a minority here, but if you're going to come to Carrie versus Patrick, I think Patrick's is a better made film. I'm sorry to all those Carrie fans out there and those Brian De Palma fans, but I'm going to take Patrick any day. I'm going to put here in the 4 pile, behind The Night Stalker, I say. Okay, next we got Phantasm. So that came out, I'm pretty sure, in 1979. Let's just have a look here at the notes. Don Coscarelli directed it. There's a lot of different elements to the movie. Some don't work that well. Others work extremely well. What works extremely well, I think, is the introduction of one of the more unique and terrifying horror villains, horror monsters, in the Tall Man. Really, as the name would suggest, tall, imposing figure. Plays the part of an undertaker in the movie, looks at every part of it as well. And I think the other great element to the movie is what I think is one of the great horror movie props in one of the great props in a horror film. This silver ball that kind of flies around and has a drill in it and embalms people. It's this crazy kind of like prop that Don Coscarelli kind of thought up of. And while there had been a few different sequels to it, I remember seeing the second one. I'm not sure about the first. I think the first one is the best film. There are some other elements to the movie though that I found kind of odd in it. There's a scene where one of the characters all of a sudden breaks out into song with an acoustic guitar, which I think was kind of weird. I'm just going to pop it up here in the 3 piles. It's going to be a high ranking 3. It could go in a 4. I'm going to put here in a 3. I'm going to put it a high ranking 3 in top of the parade. And there's some other elements to the film as well in regards to. I think there was the film was shot over like a really long period of time. It is a independent film. I think it might be a Canadian film. It's a film that really keeps you on your toes because there's so many things happening. There's a world building aspect of it. There's like other things in regards to interdimensional travel as well. And I think a lot of it, while incredibly interesting, is sometimes can be just a little overwhelming. But yeah, there are elements in the film, as I said, that are fantastic. Some really great twists, some really great jump scares. And the Tall Man, I think, is one of the great unsung kind of like horror villains. But overall, I'm going to put it here in a 3. It'll be a high 3, borderline with a 4. Yeah, I'm going to leave it there for now. Next up is one of the most, I think, shocking horror movies to ever be released, and that is the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, released in 1974, directed by Tobe Hooper. Again, independent film, did monster business when it came out. Interestingly though, the elements behind the scenes in regards to the people funding the movie were very kind of nefarious, in that I'm pretty sure it was like practically the mob who funded the movie. So whatever money Texas Chainsaw Massacre made, I'm not sure that Tobe Hooper saw or any of it went into the pockets of the people who financing the movie. These really kind of like criminal elements to it. If I remember correctly from a documentary I saw about the film, they introduced the one again, kind of like Phantasm. Had the Tall Man, and Halloween had Michael Myers, one of the great horror movie monsters and villains in Leatherface, who was of course inspired in some ways by the notorious Ed Gein, who was this kind of like just really kind of like infamous figure from I believe like the 1940s and 1950s, where who inspired all sorts of characters from Leatherface to the Norman Bates character in Psycho to Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. Is one of those great kind of boogeyman in real life. What Texas Chainsaw Massacre had going for it though was a really kind of and I think it's both a positive and a negative. It's like a really kind of nasty element in regards to the kind of like the family dynamic of these kind of like redneck, inbred kind of hillbilly kind of characters. There's a thing about the movie where it's just incredibly claustrophobic in a sort of way, in that there's just so much madness going on in the film, so much screaming going on in the film. You can practically, when you watch it, you can practically see the screen dripping with the sweat, which from what I've read about the film, the conditions of filming at that time in Texas was incredibly brutal. There was like a heat wave and a humidity and the heat and everything else. Very long hours was just like incredibly overbearing. I think you can really see that kind of distress and that exhaustion throughout the movie. And I think sometimes when watching the film, and I've seen it a few times, it makes for very uncomfortable viewing, and not in a good way. Sometimes you can be uncomfortable watching the film, but you could kind of appreciate the filmmaking that got into doing that. Other times, like watching the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, it just feels like too much, and you just want to turn off the TV and just take a cold shower and kind of like just wipe away the heat, the dirt, and everything else that the film kind of just seems to exhume from the screen. I'm going to place Texas Chainsaw Massacre right around here in the 3 column. Again, nothing to do at all with the film's legacy. I mean, the film's legacy is set in stone. I think what's really interesting about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre is that even though there's been a number of reboots and sequels and prequels and what have you, that the original still stand the test of time as the best movie. But I do appreciate what Tobe Hooper did with that movie in regards to its horror elements. I mean, Leatherface to this day is one of those horror movie villains that I don't know what it is about him, but he just still has an effect on me even as a 40-something-year-old adult. Next up, we have one of the great, if not the best, folk horror movies, and that is The Wicker Man. Directed by Robin Hardy. Who else is in it? Edward Woodward is in it. Christopher Lee. A really interesting film in that it's almost kind of like a musical as well, in that the director Robin Hardy gives a lot of space to kind of like these moments of song and dance in the film. I mean, it doesn't take up a lot of the screen time, those elements, but it's definitely there because it's just part of the environment that these characters live in, where song and dance and these kind of pagan rituals are really kind of prominent in their lives. And Edward Woodward, who plays a police officer who travels from the mainland to this island, looking into an abduction of a girl. He's a Christian, and he's also a virgin as well, which is I think a really interesting kind of character trait. And he explores the island, and he's just really disgusted by the really kind of pagan elements in regards to sex and all other elements as well. Really kind of like goes against his kind of more pure Christian instinct, and as a lawman as well. It's really kind of great dynamic, and Christopher Lee delivers one of his best performances as the cult leader, I guess you could call him, in the movie. I forgot what the character's name is, but he's fantastic in the film as well. Christopher Lee is one of those actors who, of course, was around for decades and did not only great things on screen but off screen. Like if you look into his background, but prior to as an actor, I think I'm pretty sure that he was like a spy. I know he was a soldier of some sort. I think he fought during World War II. I'm pretty sure. But he's just a fascinating man and a fantastic actor. And his role in The Wicker Man, I think, is one of his best. And The Wicker Man, to me, is one of the great kind of like horror movies. Folk horror has become incredibly popular over the last several years, since I believe since like The Witch came out and Midsummer and a bunch of other films as well. But The Wicker Man still holds that power. And not only that, the ending of the film. Man, talk about a really iconic, memorable, horrific, impactful way to end the movie. And for me, it goes right here in the 4 category. It's one of my favorite horror movies. I think I'm going to put it around here, I think. See, this is when it gets tricky, this tier here of films. Because I do love The Wicker Man. It's one of my favorite movies. But yeah, I think I'm going to put it around here. I think that'll be a good spot for it there. I won't put it in front of Invasion. I love Invasion as well. All right, so we're up here to the last film. We're going to end on a light note. We're going to end with, in my opinion, one of the great horror comedies, one of the great horror parodies, delivered by none other than Mel Brooks. Of course, I'm talking about Young Frankenstein. What is there to say about this movie? I think that Gene Wilder is a genius. I think his role as Victor von Frankenstein, as he likes to pronounce it in the movie, is one of his best. Peter Boyle as the Frankenstein monster is fantastic. The whole Ritz dance sequence in the film is hilarious. The different minor roles in the film, including Gene Hackman, who has played the blind villager. I totally forgot he was in that movie. I watched Young Frankenstein. I think I watched some clips recently, and I totally forgot that Gene Hackman was in the film. It's fantastic. Terry Garr is fantastic in it as well. One of those great horror comedies, one of those great parodies, and I think in its own right, as a comedy as a whole, has terrific scenes in it, really memorable scenes in it as well, that really stands out even today. I think it's Mel Brooks, probably his best film in my opinion. The stuff that he does with that movie is just absolutely fantastic. I think the marriage between Gene Wilder and Mel Brooks was really perfect, especially in the context of this film. You need someone Gene Wilder is one of those actors, as people will remember from his role as in Willy Wonka in a Chocolate Factory. He does comedy incredibly well, but there's a certain kind of madness to him as well, kind of a certain unease to him, and I think he really brings that those elements to the role as Victor von Frankenstein, the son of the infamous Dr. Frankenstein, who brought the first. That's the premise of the film. Is the son who follows in his father's footsteps and tries to bring the dead back to life. So I'm going to pop this one. It is one of my favorite films as a horror comedy. I'm going to pop that right here. So 1970s horror tier list done. So right at the top is The Exorcist, right at the bottom is The Exorcist 2. Let's see, so my top 10 1970s horror movies would be The Exorcist, Jaws, Alien, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, The Wicker Man, Dawn of the Dead, Young Frankenstein, Martin, Halloween, and Duel. I'm happy with that. If I put those 4 there, yeah, I'm happy with that as a top 10 1970s horror movies. So I thank you all for watching this tier list with me. As I said before, if you want to, if you like what you see here, you want to see more cool content, including my Matt's Movie Reviews podcast. I interview directors every week. My movie reviews, top 10 lists, and other great content like this. Please subscribe to the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please help out with my Patreon. Check out my T Public merch store, and I'll be back again very soon with more content. Bye. Thank you for watching the Matt's Movie Reviews channel. Please subscribe for more reviews, podcast interviews, and exclusive content. Also, if you would like to request a review and support my work, please join my Patreon via the link in the description below.